I'm Kitty Clark, and in this video I'm going to be talking a little bit about the research that happens in and around my work. The subject matter that seems to come up over and over for me surrounds countercultures and alternative living, esoteric, supernatural, parapsychology, horror, science fiction, and I have a particular interest in how these themes are presented and explored in terms of world building, especially in immersive theme spaces such as theme parks and video games. I love to collect books and often start there when I'm in a research phase. I'm drawn to books that are actually published by the community they're relevant to in a particular cultural moment, usually countercultural New Age books from the 60s and 70s. Reading them feels like a way to connect more directly with those communities, almost like a form of time travel. I have a few books and I would like more from a publisher that was also a bookshop in Brighton in the 1970s called the Unicorn Bookshop. From the accounts of people who remember the bookshop, it seems like it was a real countercultural hub in Brighton at the time. One of my favourite books is Shelter by Stefan Jelkin, which was published by Unicorn. You can see from the really unique graphic design, it's got so much information packed into it, presented in the style that has a real energy to it of the time. It's all handwritten with images from all over the place kind of pasted into it, and it has these small asides from the author sometimes next to super practical information about house building and different types of living, like this idea about incorporating the rubbish produced in a living space into the walls of the house. The character of a man, family, group may be read from their refuse. The daily rubbish is a partial history. Non-compostable rubbish might be put in bags and evacuated. Thus, the house might be extended by evacuating garbage. If the bags were transparent, then the walls would be historical records. Monthly rituals as a new section is added. Carefully selection of packagings with view to it being part of the wall next month. Cornflakes sell best with wallpaper designs on the packet. Old clothes, gadgets, games, furniture, broken toys, books, this scrapbook would all take their part in the wall. A sense of time and place, and the social embarrassment of a large house. The attitude of the book is so appealing to me. Like, even in the front cover, it advocates tearing the book apart, adding things to it, throwing away the bits that you don't like. There's more information about the Unicorn Bookshop on this blog from Brighton University's project chronicling Radical Brighton, which actually also has a scan of a book called Alternative Brighton on there. I actually do a lot of research online, but I like at least starting with these books, and usually whenever I read one of them they give me so many more things that I want to look up. An example of a book which I don't have in my collection but is reproduced online in the Internet Archive is a book which is key to the story of the Philadelphia experiment, which my work, The Experiment, was inspired by. M.K. Jessup was a ufologist who wrote The Case of the UFO. In it, he hypothesised the existence of UFOs and their means of propulsion. Sometime after publishing it, he began receiving letters from a mysterious Carl Allen, who claimed to have witnessed the disappearance of the SS Eldridge, and gave lots of details which would come to be known as the Philadelphia experiment. A copy of Jessup's book was also sent to the Office of Naval Research, with lots of annotations that appeared to be from multiple people, but were understood to be also from Carl Allen. Jessup's book was later republished with the annotations by the Office of Naval Research, which is what's been archived here. This book, Anti-Gravity and the World Grid, is a collection of essays by various authors who are interested in the theory that there's an invisible energy grid that covers the planet, which various anti-gravity anomalies can be attributed to, amongst other things. It has a section specifically covering the Philadelphia experiment and actually reproduces some of the contents of the letters written to Jessup. The details in there I found very resonant and memorable. There were only a few of the original experimental DE's crew left by NASA. Most went insane. One just walked through his quarters wall in sight of his wife and child, and 2 other crew members was never seen again. 2 went into the flame, i.e. they froze and caught fire, while carrying common small boat compasses. 1 man carried the compass and caught fire. The other came for the laying on of hands as he was the nearest, but he too took fire. They burned for 18 days. The faith in hand-laying died when this happened, and men's minds went by the scores. The experiment was a complete success. The men were complete failures. There are some other interesting parts of the book on other various subjects, including party levitation, which is a sort of group levitation exercise, with specific instructions on how you should do it, which I haven't tried yet, but I would like to. Elaborating on the ideas that surround the Philadelphia experiment is a book called The Montauk Project, which presents itself as factual. It calls it an exercise in consciousness and uses what it calls soft facts, meaning facts which are not supported by hard evidence. Essentially, it leaves it up to the reader to decide whether it is actually fact or science fiction, and adds to the existing story within the Philadelphia experiment of interdimensional travel, including alien technology, time travel, amongst other things. From when I first heard of the Philadelphia experiment story, the key thing that always stuck in my mind particularly was the detail of the crew being fused into the walls of the ship when they returned back from wherever it was that the ship had disappeared to. And this idea of transmogrification, or an in-between state of partial human, partial object, really stuck with me. So I think I've sought out to read more about things that cross this kind of physical boundary. I was immediately drawn to this book because of the title, as haunted houses are a recurring theme in works that I've made in the past. In the book, D. Scott Rogo thinks about hauntings and ghosts in a more of a parapsychological way, suggesting that the idea that ghosts are not necessarily continuing spirits of people that have died, but potentially psychokinetic phenomenon. And he uses terms like memory pictures or energy forms of ways of describing these phenomena. Elsewhere in the book, I thought this picture was really striking. It's a sort of supposed communication between a ghost and a person living in a place called Borley Rectory, which is apparently the most haunted place in England. Something that I'm interested in looking at is the dissonance between the supernatural experience described by those who have perceived it and the way it's presented for a wider audience, typically in entertainment spaces like haunted houses, theme parks, horror movies, Halloween celebrations. I have a particular interest in the way that theme parks use physical space for experiential storytelling. And in my own work, I attempt to use some of the same physical cues. I see them as gestures of world building, although unlike theme parks, I tend to have a less is more approach. I like kind of uncomfortable space between the real world and the imagined world. I began working with audio because with it, there's so much potential to create non-physical experiences that still have a sense of being in a place, like a kind of world building that's unrestricted by sense, playing around in a metaphysical world, attempting to portray what's unseeable. In many traditional audio dramas, sound effects are hugely important in adding depth and detail to the action taking place. So when I was working on the experiment, I worked with a Foley artist to create a set of sounds that would both describe and attempt to distort the space that I was depicting. These are a few of the sounds that we recorded. It's not directly for any artworks, but in quite an amateurish way, I like to make field recordings when I'm in places that have some kind of sonic significance. Something I came across recently that I've really been enjoying is the work of Ty Bell, a sound recordist who in the 1970s made lots of long-form field recordings of different environments under the name of Syntonic Research Inc. He was interested in the psychoacoustic properties of environmental field recordings, and he made a series of recordings called environments. So, for example, he made a recording of dawn and dusk in the Okefenokee swamp, or the sounds of a hippie bee-in Central Park. The first recording for the environment series was called The Psychologically Ultimate Seashore. It was a computer-processed recording of the ocean, which he made working with a neuropsychologist called Louis Gertzman at Bell Labs, who was a specialist in speech synthesis. He actually created the real computer voice behind How from 2001. According to Tybell's daughter, who's taken over running Cytonic research, some people reacted really badly to the recording, saying it made them feel really anxious, so he never considered the Seashore recording to be one of his most successful. I think commonly today, field recordings have been used as an aid for meditation, which brings me to these books. All of these books provide practical guides on the ways that a reader can attempt to leave the physical realm through astral projection, guided meditation, mental time travel. In various ways, they give exercises that they say can help you train yourself to achieve any of those things. For example, in Practical Time Travel, the book describes an exercise that initiates automatic writing and begins with envisioning a dot which becomes a tunnel, increasing in size. When the mouth of the tunnel reaches the participant, they begin writing without looking on a piece of paper, and then the paper must be sealed in an envelope without ever being read and given to a psychometrist for evaluation. Something I like in the Meditator's Manual is a suggestion that you should make a physical gesture to signal passing from the real into the imagined world to maintain a distinct balance between the consciousnesses. Before beginning each session of meditation, make a gesture with the hands as though parting or opening a pair of curtains. Then, at the end of the session, you will symbolically close the curtains again. This idea of doorways, portals, points of transition comes up in both this book and the Astral Projection Workbook. Something I've been thinking about lately is how certain video games could be seen as a kind of guided meditation. I particularly enjoy walking simulator type games, which is a term that was supposedly initially used in a derogatory sense, but has since been embraced and now defines its own genre. Walking simulators are typically non-combat oriented and often slow-paced exploration games that tend to value narrative over action or complicated mechanics. Definitely not in the category of walking simulators, but very influential to me in terms of world building are the games in the Dark Souls trilogy and Bloodborne. The games themselves are extremely action-oriented, but the part I'm really drawn to is the script writing and performances of the voice actors, which have a totally unique style that's very spare and atmospheric. Within the game world, players are able to leave messages for each other using a predetermined set of phrases and words. The combination of these particular words in their awkward and convoluted sentences have always struck me as a kind of bizarre poetry that has an essence I dream of capturing in my own writing. Another game world I've really loved spending time in is Ico, which has a very distinctly sparse design of echoey, empty castle-like structures that you navigate. I read that Ico's creator, Fumito Ueda, was inspired by the metaphysical paintings of de Chirico, and you can definitely see the influence in the kind of lonely, distorted places in the game. Not long ago I found a picture of a de Chirico painting and I've stuck it on the wall next to my bed in the hope that I might be able to explore it in my dreams sometime, which hasn't worked yet, but I will keep trying.